So, I promised I wouldn't get heavy into the jargon and research stats and research method stuff, but well, basically, I lied. We need to cover it a little bit. And I'm going to try and keep it simple, but the fact is, you are going to need to know a little bit about research design and research analysis to do your project. So, if when we're doing this video, you start going, oh my gosh, I don't understand anything Faye is saying, I think the goal here is really for you to go away, reread your stats book, reread your research skills books, go back over any classes that you've got, just to make sure that you've got a grounding in this. We're going to start off simple though. I want to just get to grips with what your design is because you've got really far in this design process so far. You've got a really good understanding of your question, you've got an understanding of what you're going to be doing, your method, you've got an understanding of your sample. You're getting there, you're really close now to having a final research project. But we just want to nail this design because not least of all, you're going to have to explain it at some point when you do your dissertation. So you want to nail what it is right now. Research design, let's start with the obvious question. Is it quantitative or qualitative? Okay, let me explain what the difference is. It's really simple. Quantitative involves numbers, qualitative involves words. If you think of it like that, it's the easiest thing in the world. So if you're doing interviews and then you're going to be looking at all of the words that the person has said and maybe theming them together, that's qualitative. If you're going to be looking at maybe, I don't know, questionnaires or some kind of measures where you're going to have people answer a series of questions and then you're going to add numbers to it, that's quantitative. So, for instance, maybe you're going to ask people, have you ever been to counselling? Yes, no. And you'll assign yes will be a 1, no will be a 2, and then you can get the average of how many people have been to counselling. You can get things like, what percentage of people said yes, what percentage of people said no on questions. So that's giving us numbers. Maybe you have a measure like an anxiety measure and it's got a series of items, so a series of statements, and people have to say how much they agree, from strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree, strongly disagree. If you have one of those, well, then what you'd usually have is there would be numbers assigned. So maybe strongly agree is a 5, and then you've got agree as a 4, and so on down to strongly disagree as a 1. And then you maybe get the average of their responses to all of these different items, and that gives you your overall anxiety score. Or maybe you add up all of the numbers for all of the different items, and that gives you your overall anxiety score. So that would be quantitative because you're using numbers. So qualitative or quantitative. And maybe your study's got a mix of both. Maybe you're planning on doing a questionnaire that's got some quantitative questions in it, but then it's got some open questions at the end where you're going to get some text. Just as a bit of an FYI, people aren't very good at filling in those open questions. So if you're relying on getting loads and loads of text to be able to do a full thematic analysis, you're probably not. So I would rethink whether you need to maybe, if your focus is a thematic analysis, maybe an interview would be something better here. Or maybe you need to focus more on your quantitative data in those questionnaires and just have this extra open questions as just a bit of added extra rather than the full focus of your analysis, just as an FYI. Okay, so you got your quantitative and your qualitative. So that's the first thing you can say about your research design. What next? Well, next we need to decide on variables. Now, first of all, for qualitative, you might not have any of these variables. So if it's a qualitative study, it might be what's known as an exploratory study. You have a research question and you are going to explore people's thoughts, beliefs, opinions, and so on. So you might not have a specific hypothesis. You might not have a specific prediction. You might just have an open research question, and it is an exploratory qualitative study. Okay. If it's quantitative, however, in most cases, you're going to have a hypothesis. That's going to be a statement about what you think is going to happen. It's sort of like a prediction, but not quite. But I'm not going to get into the depths of why it isn't quite a prediction and all of those nuances, because I just want to keep this really general to give you a clear concept of what it is you're trying to achieve. So hypothesis, you're going to do a statement. So maybe it will be something like doing mindfulness twice a week for 3 weeks results in higher levels of well-being. That would be a hypothesis. Maybe it's going to be something like there is a relationship or a correlation, a relationship between well-being and seeking help. The more people seek help and get support, the more well-being they experience. So maybe there's a relationship there. So that was two different things. One of them was about something having an effect on something. That's a causal relationship. Doing mindfulness causes well-being to change. The other one was about a relationship, that well-being is associated, correlated, has a relationship with seeking help. Now, we're not saying one causes the other. We don't know whether seeking help makes you feel better, so increases your well-being, or whether if you have higher levels of well-being, you feel better, you're more likely to seek help. We don't know which way round the cause is here. We just know there's a relationship. As one goes up, the other goes up. So we've got two different types of study here. We've got one that's looking at an effect, a causal effect, the other one that's looking at a relationship. So you need to think about which one is yours. If you're doing a quantitative study, are you looking for a causal relationship where one thing causes something else? Or are you looking at a relationship where it is just an association, a relationship? You can't say which one's causing the other. If you're looking at just a relationship, you can't say the cause, then you're probably going to be doing something like a correlation. And in that case, you are going to have covariables. Covariables are essentially the different variables that relate back to your research question, relate back to your hypothesis, and the things that you're going to be measuring to see if they've got a relationship. So in the study I just mentioned, well-being is a covariable, help seeking is a covariable. I'm going to measure those two covariables to see whether there is indeed a relationship between them, whether if one goes up, the other goes up, and that's going to answer my hypothesis. It's going to address my hypothesis of me saying that help seeking is positively correlated with well-being, and that's going to address my research question: is there a relationship between help seeking and well-being? If, on the other hand, you're looking for a cause, maybe your study is they do mindfulness exercises 3 times in a week and you measure them before and after. So I'm looking at the causal effect of mindfulness on well-being, then I'm going to have an independent and a dependent variable. People get really bogged down in this, but it's really clear. An independent variable is the thing I manipulate, the thing I change, and I'm looking for the effect on the dependent variable. In short, the dependent variable is dependent on the independent variable. Let me say that again. A dependent variable is dependent on the independent variable. So, well-being is dependent on mindfulness. If you change the mindfulness, give them more mindfulness, then you get higher well-being. If you take away the mindfulness, you get lower well-being. So well-being is dependent on the mindfulness. So we have an independent variable of mindfulness and we have a dependent variable of well-being. So if you are doing a quantitative study, you need to make a decision as to whether you're looking at a causal effect or just a relationship. If you're looking at just a relationship, then you've got covariables and you need to be able to list your covariables. You need to look back at your research question and say, are my covariables matched to my research question? Is my hypothesis matched to my research question? Do my covariables address my hypothesis? All of those things have to be aligned. Why are you measuring something if it's not even in your question? So make sure that everything is lined up. If you are doing a causal effect, then you need to identify your independent variables and your dependent variables. You need to go away and write these down. So have your research question, have whether it's quantitative or qualitative. If it's qualitative, is it going to be an exploratory study with no hypothesis or predictions? If it is, state that. If it's quantitative, it's probably going to have a hypothesis. We need to state your hypothesis. And there might be multiple hypotheses. Remember, one concept, one hypothesis. You can't have a hypothesis that has several things, like increase in mindfulness mindfulness will Engaging in 3 sessions of mindfulness per week will result in an increase in anxiety and well-being. Sorry, an increase in happiness and well-being. Okay, so doing 3 sessions of mindfulness a week will result in an increase in happiness and well-being. That's a bad hypothesis because you've got 2 things in there, happiness and well-being. What are you going to do if actually your results show that happiness increases but well-being doesn't? Does that mean that your hypothesis is supported or refuted? That's going to get really confusing. So you need to make sure your hypothesis is just saying one thing. And if you want to say happiness and anxiety and well-being, then you need 2 hypotheses. Just repeat it, but you've got 2 so that it's really clear that you've got these 2 different things and you can test each of them. Go away and write down what those different things are for your study. Make sure you've got those really clear in your head because they're going to be important when you're thinking about the design of your study and what questions you want to ask and finalizing your study. Final thing I want to mention here is control variables. Control variables are basically the things that you measure, not because you think that they're part of your hypothesis, your prediction, your research question, or anything like that, but you just want to make sure that nothing's interrupting your results, nothing's confounding them, nothing's damaging them. So let's imagine I'm doing my mindfulness study and it turns out my entire sample are female. And actually, there's research out there that suggests that the way females respond to mindfulness is different to the way males respond to mindfulness. So now I've got a bit of a problem because my study is entirely female, but I'm going to be generalizing to everybody. So I've got a confound in there. What I might do is have a control variable. So I might actually control the balance of sex or gender within my participants. I might not actually control it by forcing something, but I might just measure it to make sure so I can check. And then if it turns out my sample is entirely female, maybe I just have to mention that in my discussion and say, do you know what, this can't be generalized because my sample is biased. And that's okay. So there'll be some times when I'll ask questions just because I need to know how to control certain variables. Those are control variables. And that might apply whether it's quantitative or qualitative. You know, if you're doing interviews, you might want to control for your entire interview sample being a particular population. Maybe you're interested in all people of all nationalities, but your entire sample is just British, and therefore can you really generalize beyond that? So you need to ask that question to make sure. So think about your overall qualitative or quantitative, think about what the design is within there, what that's going to look like, and then think about your control variables. Go away and write those down. And if you don't understand everything that I've just said, go away and do some more reading into research skills, research methods, get your head around these different terms so that you can come back and write down exactly what those things are for your study before you move on to the final few stages of designing your project.